Good morning. I think this, the topic of our panel is a perfect follow to a talk about the importance of the human side of technology, here to talk about ethics and trust with me today. To my immediate left is Danae Vara Borrell. She's the Vice President of Products at Redpoint. Next to her is Guttmann. He is a scientist, an entrepreneur in machine learning and AI and data services. He works at Tieto, and he's the executive director of the Nordic AI Institute. And last but certainly not least, we have Susana Duran, who is the director of mobile and bots at Sage. So let's get right into it. And AI is not only going to change the future of work and make companies more productive and efficient. It actually has the opportunity to solve some of the world's biggest problems. It could eradicate some diseases, help alleviate poverty, and so we have to adopt it. We have no choice. I would argue at this point, the cat's out of the bag. So how do we ensure that we reap the benefits of all of this intelligent connectivity that we're here to talk about in Barcelona and establish trust? So who would like to kick off with that first answer to the first question? Christian?
So let me just review quickly. So the question is really, how can we reap the benefits of AI and still maintain trust and sort of follow ethical guidelines? So I mean, it's of course a very big question, right? So as we discussed earlier in the coffee room, you have with AI the opportunity to make big changes, and AI, unlike perhaps other technology, have the ability to change. It can reconfigure itself. It learns over time, as that's sort of the definition of machine learning. And when that happens, you don't necessarily always know what AI will decide in the next iteration of its learning process, just as we humans, like when we are exposed to new experiences, we will make different types of decisions, right? So I think ensuring, if you define what that would mean, if it's guaranteeing that it will not do dumb things, I think that would not be possible, to be very frank. But I think you could certainly have certain measures in place, perhaps those similar to how we would evaluate when humans make decisions and humans take certain actions, and that would be a way of supporting the process of using AI in a responsible manner, if you like. So in other words, for example, when you start using an AI to make decisions about certain processes, visa applications, or how it drives a car, you would start seeing how that AI behaves, right? Have certain processes. It's like almost a recruitment process, that you would employ for an employment of a person, right, in your department. So you would start looking and seeing and checking what sort of the values, what the values are and the decisions are that AI has made previously and that it would make in these types of decision-making processes. So that would be perhaps one way to start looking at it. And then we had a discussion, I know, about hardwiring certain rules into it, but maybe we come into
We'll come back.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. Okay. Susana.
Yeah, sure. I would say that nowadays it's quite difficult to trust in technology, and it doesn't matter if you are an expert, it doesn't matter if you are a layman. All the information that it's arriving to us, it's just leading to that conclusion. It's to distrust. If we think that trust is earned over time and through actions, we need to build it first. If we think on the theme of this year, the GSMA said that it's intelligent connectivity, and they describe this as combination of IoT, AI, and 5G. We have now connected objects that are interacting with us in an intelligent way and in real time. So it's not anymore about just objects connected to internet. It's not about smart algorithms. It's about understanding that any benefit that we can reap from these connected objects, this intelligent connectivity, will bring more damages than maybe the benefits that it could bring. So let's think just on what we could have on, well, let's think on China. China, for instance, has been leading this for many years, and they have used technology to, well, to pursue law violators, and they finally end up installing a social credit system to, well, to have finally citizens in the middle of, well, helpless citizens with a government that is manipulating ethics, law, and so on. So how can we trust on them? So we first need to build trust, and then we can reap real and long-term benefits.
So you bring up a great point, and I'm going to throw this at you. We find ourselves in this world today where China is clearly using AI to try to control its population. Then on the flip side, in North America, we have internet giants who have virtually no government control, who are basically answering only to their shareholders and doing what's best for their company and to make themselves rich. So if you believe what people say about AI, today we kind of have this awful choice of like, are we handing mission control for humanity to either this authoritarian regime or to this hairy developer who's told, hurry up, get that product out to market so we can make more money, without, fully thinking through the unintended consequences of the technology? Is there a third way? What do you think?
Well, a little bit related with what we were talking about before with the trust in technology. So many of us think of AI as, this super android that's going to take the human place and take those decisions. I think that is something that might happen or not in the very, very future ahead. But right now, we should trust technology in the way that you will trust a kid. Machines, just like we were explaining, machines learn just like kids. You start with small tasks. I could rely on a kid to choose a yellow color crayon. That's okay, but I wouldn't put that same kid in a trial deciding over someone's future. Of course not. The same way I wouldn't trust which AI right now that is too young and just learning to take these decisions in the future, but I could use it to take some smart decisions or to take some small tasks that will, like you said, makes our life easier. Like you were explaining that China and in the US, that both different sides are taking over this information. No? So it's not only that it's happening in China. The thing is, it's happening in China very openly. And in the US, it's happening as well. It happened in, I think it was Baltimore, that the police department was using some AI metrics to do some profiling. Here in Spain, the law for privacy has just changed recently, so that now political parties can take a lot of information about targeting with ideals and ways of thinking of the different parties. So it's not that it's just happening in China. China is just very open. And probably it's because the difference in ethics. So for me, it's a matter that ethics, like it's mentioned, it's so human, but it's also culturally different. What something might be okay to do in China might be like something super wrong in the US or otherwise, or in different cultures, different ages as well in the same world. So while someone might think that is not ethically okay to do, someone might be supporting that. Here's the hard part. How would you wire some ethics into machine learning when we don't have a true positive and true negative in ethics? And this will eventually move throughout time and changes, just like it changed in our society.
So this brings up a couple of hard questions, I think. So one of them is, the fact that there are no universally agreed upon ethics, and even when humans profess certain values, they don't always follow them. And so we have that issue. And then we have this trust issue of like, do we feel more comfortable trusting companies to do no evil, or do we feel comfortable with certain governments not doing evil? And a lot of people would say, well, neither, right? So do we need a new social contract? Do we need a new way to, I don't like the word police, but basically to govern the use of AI globally in a way that is fair, universally accepted, is good enough and quick, and responsive, that does not rely entirely on companies doing this individually or on governments, because we don't know if all governments are, have purely altruistic aims. Is there some new structure that we need to move towards? Now, there's been some experimentation at the MIT Multimedia Lab with a system that puts humans in the loop. And basically, they do a system of digital polling where they get like a good enough reflection, just in like the way people elect a government official to represent them. This polling would be enough of an average to say, well, most people would think this is acceptable, and therefore this could be a principle. What does the panel think about this approach?
So maybe I just wanted to very quickly pick up a point you mentioned earlier. When you say AI will make decisions in the future, I think it makes already many, many decisions today. So it's very much in place. If you look at how Google is giving you search results, when a few years back it wasn't good enough, and you look for a restaurant in Barcelona now, you would be getting 5 years ago, like maybe 20, 30 restaurants. Today it would be maybe 5 or 6, so it restricts it already. And in the future, maybe it will make decisions and already book the restaurant for you. So all this will happen, and it influences the way you live your life, right? Spotify for music recommendation, etc. So that's one point. And then when it comes to the regulation, so I absolutely agree. And when you look at, so I'm also at the Karolinska Institute, actually, which is a medical university. And when you look at the medical field, which is has a tradition of thousands of years, that same thing happened there, right? Whereby not everyone can practice medicine today, right? So you have actually quite some big regulatory bodies that have been created. In the US, it would be the FDA, for example. And in Europe, usually as a practicing doctor, you need to register, you need to have gone through education, you need to register. The same with drugs, right? So in the pharmaceutical industry, it's a very long process with many clinical trials, which are very expensive to prove that the tool, the technology, which is the pill or the drug, would actually work. So with that, having said that, I'm actually not proposing that we build up the same regulatory framework for AI, because if that was the case, and I said that in some other panels, then it will take a very long time for these very beneficial technologies to ever hit the stage. And I think that will be very sad, because it's some obvious potential to make AI part, let's just again take the medical field, part of that process whereby it could detect, let's say, melanoma or abnormalities in MRI scans. So I think the process must be much quicker. And in this particular case, in fact, the FDA and the some European authorities have taken that on board in order to assess how AI can be used, for example, in these sort of medical devices. So I think the other point is, of course, who is doing AI? Today, when I talked about AI 5 or 10 years ago, and I've been working with AI very passionately for 25 years, it were a few people talking about it. Now everyone talks about it, and it's actually difficult to see what's real and what isn't. And also the way how you build these machine learning models, the ones that do it and have been doing it for maybe 20, 30, 40 years, it is a very small group of people that truly understand the mathematics behind it, and it has by and large been an open field, right? So it's like if, let's say, medicine has been a field which is 4,000 or 5,000 years old, then AI is really now 70 years old. It's very young, and very few people have the intuition around the data, the AI technologies, the methods, the science. So, and that will be an interesting situation to reflect on, on how that can be. sort of
So,
framed.
because right now we're confronted with several different problems. So, one is with machine learning, which is an early iteration of AI, we have this danger of reinforcing existing biases, and even technology companies that should be kind of ahead of the curve have had issues with this. There were headlines not in the last couple of months involving Amazon and talked about how when they first tried a few years ago to use AI to apply it to their hiring processes, they noticed after a while that they were hiring mostly men and from certain schools because that's what they had done in the past, and they kind of gave up on their program when they realized that was the case. So we have that problem to deal with. How do you make sure that we are using AI to actually improve the world and not reinforcing historical mistakes?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question because we had some good examples in history, even though it's so young, machine learning and AI. We've seen some experiments, just like you were saying with the voting system of how we elect someone to represent us. This has been an issue as well in the AI. It was 2016 when Microsoft released a chatbot in Twitter, and it took just one day to become an amazing bully and just a horrible person there. Now, why did that happen? That happened basically because of the data that was being fed on. So we have to be very careful if we want to open and have everyone some kind of, let's say, be part of how the machine is going to decide in the future. It does affect a lot its surrounding and the data that gets inputted. Just like you're saying with the case of Amazon. This is also, I think, it's not only a bias of, it's not a bias of the code, it's bias of the data inputted. There was this case where, I think it was HP, that they ran this different study in-house to see why women weren't applying to higher roles. So they figured out after a lot of research that it was because women were not happy to apply to a job unless they thought they fulfilled 100% of the requirements. While men were applying even if they just met the 60% of the requirements. That doesn't mean that there were more men apt for the job than women. It was just that women were not clicking, let's say, on the offer more than men were doing. So if this is the data that is being fed to the system, and imagine that, suppose Amazon has this AI in LinkedIn showing ads to different profiles, if the machine is learning that men of certain areas or certain schools are clicking on top of that, and women are not, it's going to be shown more to male profiles. Now, is that the fault? Is it a guilt of the algorithm? Or is it the guilt of us as society as well for maybe not clicking both the same way? So in the same way, if we try to define just the algorithms, like you're saying, not everyone can practice medicine because it's restricted. And not everyone can do machine learning because right now, even if it's open, there's these specific targeted people that understand the mathematics and the scientifics behind. That could lead into also some kind of bias. For example, when what was it? It's called the GM system for security in the cars, that you could talk to your car, and that was programmed by males, basically. And when it started going out in market, female voices were not properly identified. Same happened with Southern accents or Northeastern accents. It was was that something that was thought of and especially excluding people? I think it's more on the part of who is building this. If it's dedicated only to specific engineers from specific schools and everything, then it might be not representative of the whole community that we are. And it's not just a matter of the data that is being put into the system to learn in the future, but who is building it. I think that maybe it should be more open and have, I don't know, maybe psychologists or more people from human areas in the development of these algorithms and not just engineers.
Yeah. I definitely agree with this. Diversity should be one of the things that we think when trying to reinforce and use this historical data. We need to pull in people from social science, lawyers, policymakers, and also people from technology to discuss about these topics, to understand the societal impact of ethics. We need to bring all this diversity. I'm not talking about just men and women. It's real diversity to gather the right data to reinforce these systems. And we need to start being creative. So for instance, for these hiring systems, it would be really easy to say that we should start picking just clean data, like that data that it's not biased. But maybe we should start thinking on something like what it's done with GANs, the generative adversarial networks that are creating data from scratch. I know that the main application is images, but creating realistic images of faces, videos, and so on. But it's also used in non-images domains, like creating music, maybe creating this kind of data that it's unbiased and it's, well, ethically approved by us. Could be a good option instead of using what we are really doing. So do what we think it's the right thing, use the data that we think it's the right data instead of what we know that it's biased. I think we can trust on our behaviors. That's one point.
So I guess the key there is transparency, so that companies can be able to explain like how they derive these algorithms. What would you advise, Christian, to both entrepreneurs at startups and larger companies? How should they go about programming their algorithms and then basically explaining to their customers, to their shareholders, to their board, how certain decisions are made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good question. And I just wanted to add a little bit to what you said when it comes to diversity. So maybe a bit of a misconception. I myself studied psychology too. So I think when you look at the field of AI, these are not technologists per se. They actually is a very rich field. Like from its inception 70 years ago, most people were actually psychologists that went into AI. And when I studied AI and psychology, I learned actually very similar concepts in both fields. Just one was about understanding how we humans behave, how we make decisions, how we have emotions. And the other one was about engineering these types of qualities, if you like, right? So that's just to name. It's not as homogeneous as one might think, right, in the AI community. So that's one point. And then when it comes to the advice, so about transparency, right? So for example, at Tieto, our company, we have introduced AI ethic guidelines about half a year ago, which I agree with you, it shouldn't be us like owning that, but we should be, I also don't want to wait. So I wanted to make sure that my team and the company takes a proactive step before maybe in a few years' time some rules come out, right? So I want to do my bit on that topic. And then there's, of course, many institutions which can be considered neutral and beneficial when it comes to this, like the International Standards Organization, IEEE, and the European Union and so on. So when it comes to like companies developing these, and creating the products, as our title suggests of the panel discussion, I think you should focus a lot on trust. So trust is the enabler for your product to reach the customer. It's a customer experience and the experience of the product and the service that really matters in the first instance. And for that, in some cases, it makes sense to make the AI transparent and explainable. But there's also many cases where you shouldn't do it, where it's actually really bad. When you take now, that's maybe a semi-good example, but if you have an AI that looks at patterns, a self-driving car, and you publish how it makes these decisions, then this type of technology would be very vulnerable to so-called adversarial attacks. So essentially, you can manipulate the decision-making of the AI in some ways. And there's also business reasons where you do not want to publish or make the whole system completely transparent because that's just not good for the business logic. So, for example, in negotiation, when you're bidding for, let's say, a travel or hotel or something, you have an AI that starts taking all the bids in and it makes, so if you make that process completely transparent, then this whole business logic doesn't work, right? So there are many cases where it's not necessary or shouldn't be done.
I was just thinking of one that, as you were saying that, I know that when the MIT Multimedia Lab was asking people about how autonomous cars should make a decision if they can't prevent a collision. And they were asking people, well, if there's no choice but that people are going to die, should it be the people in the street that are going to be hit, or should it be the people in the car? And most people said, oh, it should be the people in the car. And then the next question that was asked was, well, if that was the case, would you ride in such a car? And everyone said no. It's our human nature not to be really consistent, and that adds to the problem as well. And when
Maybe I can just add also, I remembered now my psychology thesis actually was about building trustworthy chatbots. So I had essentially an experiment set up where I had a chatbot and a natural language agent that was interacting on the topic of real estate, I think it was, right? So you would create a dialogue and you were, as a user, having a chat about buying a house. And I ran this experiment with a few dozen people, right, on that level, and I was measuring aspects of trust, right? And the other chatbot had the ability to develop that trust in the relationship through certain mechanisms, right? So it would say things in different ways. And you could see a difference, right? And that might be a way for startups to start looking at it. What are the trust-adding features in your product, in your AI product that will increase trust, which forms a stronger relationship between the person and the AI and the product, So I think that would be one healthy way to start looking at it, rather than perhaps AI ethics often comes with the idea that there needs to be regulation and someone needs to put down the rules and then you hardwire it into the system. It's a way to do it, but it may not always increase trust or the user experience, In fact, often may not.
Human behavior, it's very complicated. So I think it's one of the points that we need to take into account, that understanding how a human will behave, even if you have shared guidelines, rules, you don't know exactly, because what you said, you will be in that car? No, you will not, although you think it's the right thing. So it's quite difficult to say what will happen, even if you have everything just hardwired into AI.
Talking about the startups, just like you mentioned, AI, it's been an open field, but nowadays where AI is just basically like a commodity, like someone can just input a little bit of code of AI into my different startup or whatever, and those teams might not be as diverse as we would love them to be. If we talk about this position that you're thinking of, a company which is profit-driven, and it has a team of technologists, and they say, okay, we heard about this AI and machine learning, now put up some of that into our product and make it more profitable and faster to work. It might be that those teams are not very diverse and that it actually impacts the user experience of that product. So if you're not putting all this attention and these different points of view, even if it's not on building the algorithm itself, but the application of that in some spaces of the technology that you're building, you might be missing some of this good experience for your final user. So even it's a benefit in the product itself.
Yeah, I think when it comes to product development, it would depend a lot on what your final outcome, the final outcome to be, right? So how should that interaction and the relationship between the person at the end, how should that be? And then I think you can work your way backwards. So whom would you need in the team, in the, let's say, product development team that would be enabling that experience?
And in
perhaps?
the exact example of product development, where you're using technology and AI and machine learning algorithm, not for the sake of building a human life interaction, but maybe for automatizations or making processes faster in some ways, because the machine is doing some of the processes for you, that could be easily measured. So if a task will usually take human, 2 days to complete, and the machine can finish in 5 minutes, then that's an easy way to measure things, and that builds trust. So when you're talking about product development and you're saying, yes, we use AI, so how should I trust your AI? Well, we have these metrics. We're using it in this space. Maybe you don't go all transparent in seeing the decision making, but you can explain the process and say, these are the inputs, this is what it's processed, and this is the outputs. In a manual way, it will take this long. In this automatic way, it takes this long. And you start seeing those processes, and you start seeing these benefits, and immediately you start trusting the system because those applications are being fulfilled for your benefit as the user and as the consumer as well, and obviously the company itself.
So I think everybody on the panel would probably agree that the way that you program AI can have a serious impact on your brand. That it will impact the customer experience, but it could also backfire in a big way if you get it wrong. So I want to go back to something that you said earlier, Christian, and that was that at Tieto you said you have like some kind of policies or guidelines for your teams to follow. I think it's super interesting that in December Salesforce announced that it had created a new position entitled Chief Ethics and Humane Experience Officer. And the idea was that even if the company had policies that it carefully followed, that once it unleashed its technology into the marketplace, it could be misused, and that could come back to haunt the company. So they have additionally added somebody whose job is basically to look at how their technology is playing out in the market and make sure that no one is misusing it. Is this something that you would advise?
But don't you think that this is like having a regulator? So in your company, someone that is making sure that you're following the rules, that you are following the law. So maybe we should be back to government regulations and law, and try to force them to create some legislation to enforce companies to follow these ethic guidelines. We know that law struggles to keep the pace with technology, and it's 200 or 200 steps behind it. But we need it. We need it anyway. Maybe inside the company, maybe in the government, but we need someone taking care of this. And, well, that's fine that companies ensure that there's someone reviewing carefully and understanding their own topic and making sure that it's following those ethic rules. But we need to also make sure that the country is following those guidelines. So it's a bit of alignment on, yes, okay, you, Google, or you, the company, whatever it is, you have that new role, but should be someone else that it's ensuring that, well, maybe it's just to force every company to have one of these roles. Maybe it's that, something like this. And anyway, you have that role. Who is defining the guidelines for that person will follow? Their own priority. Who is defining the priorities that company will follow? Maybe Google has one. I'm sure they have one.
Who does it at your company?
Yeah, I was just wanting to explain. I mean, when you build those, when we have these AI tools and components, I mean, one thing that you still look at is the typical quality assurance, right? That the systems sort of follow certain software engineering type rules and so on sometimes. But then, of course, now we have actually we're looking for and we're creating these tasks and jobs which are AI ethics engineers, AI transparency engineers in some cases, which are reviewing our AIs just as you would have quality software engineers reviewing the software, whether it works the way it does. And there's obviously plenty of examples of startups where you start off with a software and you have like 10 engineers in the beginning and almost no one looking at the quality, and then 2 years later, I've seen this, you have 100 quality engineers and only 20, 20 people doing the software, right? So because you need to make sure that it behaves the right way. Maybe another quick thing, I just wanted to slightly rephrase what you mentioned, how do you make sure that those that program the AI, how does it influence the brand? It's not how you program it, but how does the AI behave later on. It's a slight difference because when you program it, you might do it with certain intentions, but as the AI changes every day, you don't know how it will behave tomorrow. So, and this goes back, by the way, to now Microsoft and Google DeepMind have announced that they will be having a risk factor analysis about the AIs that they are developing in their annual report. So as a publicly listed company, you have to display to your investors, well, AI does dumb things. So what is the risk for that to happen? I mean, in terms of brand, because many big companies have a brand to protect. I think Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, and so on. It's in the billions of how much that. So it's a risk factor analysis, and it's really tricky, and because you don't know. It's essentially like making a risk factor analysis about individual humans, right? You don't know what. I mean, by and large, we have certain tempers and we have certain ways of acting, but maybe something
we're
happens.
Unpredictable.
Yeah, we are to some extent, eh? Yeah.
Did you want to?
Yes. Also about the ethics now that you like we are seeing now, AI is being used almost everywhere, and that also impacts in the product definition and in the companies themselves. So basically, the same algorithm that could help you target someone because they're trying to think that is a murderer or someone in the streets is the exact same technology that will find a lost kid into a group of people. So it could be the same algorithm used in different ways. Now, who is defining and who is validating the ethics of the company behind it? AI can be used in so many ways, and we all heard about the usage of data. That doesn't mean that it only has to use personal data. Personal data, we're all very careful of, and you don't want to be targeted or whatever, but AI can also use many different other data that is not personally related, and it will help us in our lives, just like image recognition, well, identifying patterns in medical imagery. That is a very huge impact, and it's not working towards the usage of the personal data. Now, the data of those patients, and using that data to make money and to give lend some money or not, or allow some kind of a job or not based on their health. Now that's different, but it's still on both sides. There could be some algorithms using data. It's maybe about what is the focus where we're using it and who decides what is allowed and what it's not.
So let me ask a question to the audience. Who in the audience is working on an AI? Who's in the AI field? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people who've raised their hand actually have someone who's in charge of monitoring how ethical the AI is? Okay. And would anyone here change their behavior based on what they heard here today? Will you adopt new policies or maybe bring in somebody who's got an ethical focus? Anybody in the audience have a quick question for the panelists before we end? If not, then let's just leave the audience with a key thought from each of you on a piece of advice on how to think about dealing with AI going forward.
But just to be positive, technology will have a very positive impact in our world. The only thing we need to do is just question the right questions about how that could be used, just to try to solve them, and just go towards the good impact we want to have with technology and AI.
Mm-hmm. So I would say AI is the driving force of this industrial revolution. So it will change a lot of things. And it also implies that there will be shifts of power when it comes to economy, military, and many other things. So and also AI is not starting as a big bang. It's one of those technologies that will slowly and iteratively and silently change our lives a little bit more every day for the next 10 years at least, or 20 years. So get into this topic, strongly recommend it. If it's about AI ethics specifically, which is already a very small area, but there are many institutes that I mentioned earlier, the International Standards Organization, the IEEE, the IIC, and several strategies that come out now soon in the EU in a month or two. So these are things, read them, get involved. This will influence your life and that of your kids.
And just like mentioned, it's an upcoming and ongoing revolution. It's not going to be stopped. So instead of being afraid of it and not trusting it, get to know it, embrace it, because it could be used for a better world. And as far as you can, trust your own ethics and try to use it for the best for everyone in the future as well.
Okay, with that, I'll ask you to please give a nice round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer and the panel. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you.